Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the Laurel Church of Christ. We are on our last evening with Carey Terry. I'd like to welcome everyone here. Let's get started with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we are thankful for this night. We are thankful for Brother Carey being with us. We are thankful for all those who are here as well, dear Lord, and we ask that you bless our assembly. We pray that Carey speaks your word, that your Spirit leads him. We pray that we accept your word, dear Lord, and learn how to use it in our lives and apply it to our lives and to better ourselves and to help to show the love of Christ to those around us. We pray, dear Lord, that you be with us through this week, that we can continue carrying his lessons on for a lifetime, dear Lord. We pray that you be with those who are sick of our number. As there are many who are sick and not being able to be with us, we ask your blessings upon us, and it's through Christ we pray. Amen.
I'm gonna trade my earthly home for a better one, bright and fair. Christ left to prepare a mansion for his children in the air. I'll join them in that land where tears nor sorrows can be found. When I receive my mansion, robe and crown, the weather there is always fair. There's sunshine day and night, no cold in the rain will fall there, for the sun shines ever bright. I'll need no heavy garments, I'll just wrap my robe around. When I receive my mansion, robe and crown, mansion, robe and a crown, their love always abounds. Let me your throne surround. Lord, please reserve my mansion, robe and crown. My head is bowed and bloody now from the work that I tried to do. But one day I'll be rewarded with a crown so bright and new. I'll wear a smile so bright there'll be no cause for a frown. And I receive my mansion, robe and crown, mansion, robe and a crown. Their love always abounds. Let me your throne surround. Lord, please reserve my mansion, robe and crown. Lord, please reserve my mansion, robe and crown.
Well, good evening, everyone. If you would open up to Matthew chapter 6, we'll get started there in just a moment. This must be the fastest week of the whole year. Seems like it was just yesterday we were getting started, and now we turn around and it's already Wednesday night. I hope you've enjoyed the series of lessons this week. When you really stop and just think about the theme that we've used in terms of what God has promised, He is able also to perform, it takes you real quickly to look at that thought of going, whenever God makes a promise, He is not lacking in ability or strength to keep that promise. And His faithfulness is unrivaled. If He gives you a promise, you know that it's there and it's ours, if we follow with His covenant. As we've worked our way through the week, we come tonight and to see this theme about God will provide. And we're going to start here on the physical side, but then we're going to turn to the spiritual side and really take a look at maybe some things that are pretty ancient, pretty old, but maybe be able to see them through a new covenant lens. If you notice here in Matthew chapter 6, look down at verse 31. Jesus says, "Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear for clothing? For the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things." He says, don't get so concerned about the physical things. It is probably one of the easiest things to slide into, to be worried about the physical. And yet here's Jesus talking about, know that I'm going to provide what you eat, what you wear. And if you take a thought, the verses that have really come right before here, verses 25 through 30, all tying together with what man tries to supply is always outdone by what God supplies. Whether you think about clothes in terms of what's provided, he says, look at the way I've clothed the lilies of the field. He says, you know what? The birds don't sow, they don't reap, yet look at how well they eat. They even survive in the winter. It's always a good thought for us, especially when you get really cold days and maybe you get a blanket of snow to hit the ground. And you look outside and you see a few birds, and to go, look, God's faithful. He kept his promise. Even these birds are surviving in this terrible cold. And you realize God's taking care of them. What makes me think that he can't keep his promise to me? He comes to this point and he says in verse 31, do not worry. Throughout verses 25 through 34, he's going to basically say, do not worry 5 times. I don't know about you. How many times do you have to hear something before it sinks in? Well, maybe we need this many times. But you stop and realize, here's Jesus making the statement, do not worry. Don't be worried about this. Don't be concerned about these things. And yet, if it was anything else, if it was any other command, if he says, don't lie, don't lie, don't lie, don't lie, we'd go, okay, we know, we don't lie, okay. When he says, don't worry, we go, well, I don't know. And you realize there's a reason he says it. There's a reason we don't have to worry. He says, because I'm the God who takes care of these things. And know that whenever you're worrying, you're really doubting me. You're not doubting you. Now, notice where this brings him. He says here in verse 32, the Gentiles eagerly seek all these things, food, clothing. He says, for your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. It's not a secret to him. He knows what you need. In the same way that parents, whenever you see that your children need something, don't you find a way to provide? Do you hold back in something that you could easily provide? If you know it's needed? How much more does God love us over the way we love our children? To know it's taken care of. Then comes verse 33. Here's the promise. He says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. You give his kingdom the first place. You give his righteousness the first place. He says, I take care of all the physical. You won't have to be concerned. If you think about the two together, he says, seek first his kingdom. Jesus, at this point, has not yet been set upon the throne of the king of the kingdom of God. But now he is seated on the throne. And you go, are you really going to seek first my kingdom and my righteousness? He says here his righteousness, talking about God. But to go, what about our attitudes and our behaviors? He says, what about our mindset on the things that we do? He says, if we focus on his righteousness, which is a righteousness by faith, not by works, but by faith, and because the righteousness by faith is there, here come the actions that are mirrored. He says, you seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, I'll take care of all the physical things. All the physical things for the rest of your days, so long as you seek first my kingdom and my righteousness. So whenever we start to wonder about the physical things, is God going to really take care of these things? It should really come down to just 2 questions. Do I really seek first his kingdom? Do I really seek first his righteousness? Because whenever we tail off away from those things, that's whenever worry really starts to set in. Remember, God makes the promise. Look at what he says next. Look at verse 34. He says, so do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Here's Jesus, only one to live a perfect, sinless life. And he says, do you want to know how the mindset goes with living a life of righteousness, don't worry about tomorrow. Now, I want to throw in this thought here. Maybe you're a person who says, the night before when I go to bed, I want to think about my day for the next, when I wake up, about the things that I'm going to do. I do want to keep you in mind, the Jews kept time from sundown to sundown. So for them, the new day began at sundown. So if you want to think about the next day, that's just fine. But the idea is only live one day at a time. It sounds cliche, but if you really stop and consider it, where do you think they got that statement from? Didn't it come from Jesus? He says, don't worry about tomorrow, because you may not get to tomorrow. Handle today first, and handle it in light of seeking His kingdom and His righteousness. So he looks at these physical things, and so how easily we get concerned about the physical. We wonder about, well, what about health? What about shelter? What about the other things that go with the physical side? Does that mean he doesn't care? Certainly not. But then you go from this point and you turn to the spiritual side to look at things. If you would, look over at Hebrews chapter 8. Hebrews chapter 8 and look at verse 1. We're going to spend the rest of our time here in Hebrews and really take a look at some things that perhaps you're very familiar with. But the very main point, this is the quickest way I know to sum up 7 chapters. Hebrews chapter 8 verse 1 gives it away. It says, now the main point in what has been said is this: we have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. He says, this is where Jesus is now. He sits at the right hand of God. He sits enthroned here. He says, the majesty in the heavens as the high priest. And if you think about the role of the high priest in the Old Testament, the high priest was the one who was the mediator between God and man. Here's Jesus. He's going to be the way that we relate to God. It's going to be because of what He does and how He responds. But I want you to notice the very next verse, verse 2. He says, a minister in the sanctuary and in the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, not man. Now he brings us to the tabernacle. And if you think back through the Old Testament, hopefully you're familiar a little bit with the tabernacle. Tabernacle was a tent. It was made to where it could move and go from one place to the next. God gave Moses the instruction in Exodus 25 through 27 about the dimensions of what it should be, how it should look, and they were to build it exactly according to the pattern that was laid out. And in doing that, there was a reason God was so specific. And if you notice it here in verse 2, he says, this is where Jesus is now. If you've ever wondered, here's Jesus. He gives His life to die for us. He's raised on the third day. 40 days He spends on earth. Over 500 people bear witness to see Him as an eyewitness of His resurrection. And then He ascends to the right hand of God. And 7 days later, the gospel is preached in a new way where forgiveness of sins is offered. Be baptized into Jesus, receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. And you go, what is Jesus doing now? In what way is He continuing to provide for us now? He says He's the minister in the sanctuary. Sanctuary is a holy place, a place of refuge. He says in the true tabernacle. Whenever you hear true tabernacle, what does that naturally lead your mind to think about? Was there a false tabernacle? Well, I would encourage you not to say false. I'd say there's one that was made in its image. And that's the one that God gave the instruction to Moses about. If you see the picture here, he says the true tabernacle, he says, which the Lord pitched, not man. This is the one that Jesus pitched, the one that He brought into existence. And it's not the one that's on earth. It's the one that's in heaven, in the very presence of God. Notice how this continues. Verse 3. Going back to the old covenant. He says, "For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices, so it is necessary that this high priest also have something to offer." He says the high priest went in to offer up these sacrifices, and I know it says it here, gifts. Sacrifices are things that are typically thought of that are offered because of sins. Gifts are things that are offered out of a desire to want to offer something to God. They were not commanded, they were something you gave of a free will. He says this is what high priests do. In the days in the wilderness, even carrying on into the promised land for a while, these offerings are being made, high priest after high priest, starting off with Aaron and being handed down from generation to generation, even including Phinehas and later on other men. If you see it here in verse 4, it says, "Now if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are those who offer the gifts according to the law." If you remember, the priests were those of the tribe of Levi, even just a section of the sons of Levi. Jesus is from the tribe of Judah. So while on earth, he doesn't fit to be a priest, to go into the earthly temple at his time. He says, but realize this. Here's Jesus. On earth, he wasn't made to be a priest, but now he sits as the high priest. And that's the main point of the previous 7 chapters in Hebrews. Then, verse 5, he says, "Who serve a copy and shadow of the heavenly things." These earthly priests back there in their day and time, all they did was serve in a copy and a shadow. When you start using words like shadow, then you have to have something of substance. When you use the word like copy, you have to have an original. He says, they serve in a copy and a shadow. It's interesting because in seeing copy and shadow, you go, then there must be an original. Then there must be a true tabernacle. And it's this one in heaven. Notice how he continues. He says, they serve a copy and a shadow. You can't eat shadows. He says, let's come to some reality. That's why I used the word true tabernacle back up in verse 2. It's the reality of what it looks like before God. If you've ever wondered, what is Jesus doing now? He's interceding for us. He's given himself over to minister in the sanctuary, in the very presence of God, to serve in the true tabernacle. He's going to go on to describe it a little bit more, but verse 5, he says, who serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things, just as Moses was warned by God when he was about to erect the tabernacle. For see, he says, that you make all things according to the pattern which is shown you on the mountain. He says, I showed you what it should look like. If you go back through and read the tabernacle of what it's made of, there's dyed porpoise skins, there's all kinds of unique things, and you go, here's God creating animals just so that it imitates the true tabernacle. Skins that are dyed certain colors, other aspects, just so that the shadow would have a form of the original. And whenever you look at your shadow, hopefully in the afternoon, don't look at noon, you won't find much of a shadow. Wait till later in the day, all of a sudden, doesn't the shadow kind of take on your form? Doesn't it have some similarities? Don't let it get too long in the day or you'll be 10 feet tall. But you stop and notice there's some similarities in place. And so here's this tabernacle, the one that God told Moses to build. He says, you make it exactly like what I showed you because it is a copy and a shadow of the original and the true tabernacle that's in heaven, that Jesus the Lord pitched. We think about pitching a tent. That just makes sense, doesn't it? He uses the same idea here. He continues on into verse 6. He says, but now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, by as much as he is also the mediator of a better covenant, which has been enacted on better promises. Now his ministry is more excellent. He says he's the mediator of a better covenant. The old covenant was holy, it was good, but now comes in a better covenant, the new covenant. And then he continues here in verse 6 to make the statement, which has been enacted on better promises. The promises that they had in Israel were good promises. But the promises that we have in Jesus now are better promises. And I want you to get a little bit of a picture about these better promises. And that's really what we're going to look at for the rest of our time together tonight. If you would, look over at Hebrews chapter 9 and look down at verses 11 and 12. You get a picture of what these better promises are. You see how Jesus is responding in a way to be a better mediator. Hebrews chapter 9, verses 11 and 12. He says, "But when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things to come, all of a sudden these old promises Jesus came and fulfilled. He took care of the old promises, and now here he is coming forward. He says, a high priest of the good things to come. He entered through the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is to say, not of this creation." Here's Jesus, not in an earthly tabernacle, but here he is in a greater and more perfect tabernacle. And here it goes out of its way to say, not made with hands. It's not human hands that built this one. He made it. He pitched it. He created it. Now, I want you to think for a moment. Can you have a shadow without an original? Can you have a shadow without substance? Can you imagine going outside and seeing a bunch of shadows, but there's nothing to match with them? Wouldn't that drive you crazy? Make you a little scared, maybe? So I want you to think for a moment. If what God told Moses to build was a copy and a shadow, when did the Lord make the true tabernacle? It had to come before Moses' day. It was in place before the one that Moses had built in the wilderness. So you realize this true tabernacle, not made with hands, that Jesus pitched and built, was built before he came to earth. All you see in Jesus' life, you see him seek first the kingdom of God, you see him seek first the righteousness of God. And in overcoming death, now here he sits as high priest in the true tabernacle in heaven. So often we wonder, what is Jesus doing now? As you continue, look at verse 12. He says, "And not through the blood of goats and calves, but through his own blood, he entered the holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption." Where Jesus serves in the true tabernacle in heaven, he doesn't take animal blood. He takes his own. And notice the power that's found in his blood. He says here, he went through his own blood and he entered the holy place. When you think about the holy place, the first room that you would come into in the tabernacle, here's where he came. And then you get the other picture of the rest of the verse. He says, he came once for all. He's not like those old covenant priests who had to come and offer the same sacrifices over and over and over again and never dealt with sin. He came to bring his blood before God. He says, to make atonement for us. And if you notice the tail end of verse 12, he says, having obtained eternal redemption. Just think about those two words together. Redemption. It's literally a term of buying back. It's actually a slave term of buying back slaves to yourself so that you can take care of them, so they can be cherished, So they'll be provided for. Not just in a physical way, but even in a spiritual way. And he says, and the redemption that I bought you back with is not just good until you physically die. It is good throughout eternity. So when he's talking about eternal redemption, he says, I'm bringing my blood into the true tabernacle that I pitched, that I built with my own hands. He says, and it's in place with better promises, with a better covenant. Eternal redemption. Will God provide? He certainly does. And not just for now. We're not just talking about the mere things that are temporary of the physical things. We're talking about eternal things that'll endure throughout eternity, forever, without ever ceasing. If you look back earlier in Hebrews chapter 9, start back in verse 1, and let's work our way through some of these promises. It says, now even the first covenant had regulations of divine worship and the earthly sanctuary. He says the first covenant, in other words, the covenant that came through Mount Sinai that God gave to Moses, he says even within it there were regulations of divine worship. He says there's certain ways things were to be done. He even continues, and in the earthly sanctuary. Remember earlier it talked about Jesus being in the sanctuary? That's the heavenly sanctuary. Not to be confused with the copy and the shadow, the tabernacle that was built on earth. He says, yeah, there were regulations, even for the earthly sanctuary. And now he's going to start to work his way through this sanctuary, this tabernacle, this holy place, the Holy of Holies. And if you look at the illustration that's given to you, if you notice on the far right, you see the entrance. It always faced the east, the rising of the sun. No matter where they moved it to, no matter where they took it, that's where they gained direction. Isn't that kind of a blessing? God made it real easy on them. Wherever you see the sun come up, that's where you put the entrance. You realize in coming in, you come to the altar of burnt offering. A burnt offering in the Old Testament, you can read more about this in Leviticus chapter 1. A burnt offering in the Old Testament said, the explanation in these terms are, God, I'm going to take this animal, I'm going to put my hand on its head, and this animal is going to take my place. And I am going to kill the animal. They would actually cut its neck, and it would die from two things. It can no longer breathe and loss of blood. That should give us a little thought. What does Jesus die of? Does he not die of not being able to breathe, blood loss, dehydration? You realize you start to see some parallels with Jesus. Here we come as a burnt offering, different than a sin offering. And the burnt offering said, God, I give you all of me. I completely dedicate myself to you completely. This is what we did whenever we turned away from sin and came to Jesus. We said, I'm not doing it my way anymore. There's a term we have for that. It's called repentance. I'm not doing it my way anymore. That's where we begin to offer up a burnt offering. But there's one thing missing before you offer a burnt offering. You have to have fellowship with God. If you notice coming in from the right after the altar of burnt offering, you come to the laver, or here it's talked about as being a bronze basin. It was very large. Probably if you look at these chairs that are here in the middle, it would probably be about that big. It held about as much water as you can fill a semi-truck with. That'd be kind of hard to come up with in the wilderness. But later on, that's what it became in the temple, so it's a little bit smaller than that while it's in the wilderness. So here they are, the priests would come in and they would wash. Whenever we come to Jesus to share in this new covenant, there's a repentance, there's a complete change of heart, change of direction, and then we come to Him to be washed, to be washed in His blood. It's no longer a basin of just water. You think about coming into the true tabernacle, here is the blood of the Lamb. And to go, that's whenever we were baptized into Christ, the blood of the Lamb is sprinkled on our heart. You can read more about that in Hebrews chapter 10. That's where we were made clean. We're baptized into the water, but what God is doing through Jesus is His blood is being applied to us. That's where we become sharers of this eternal redemption. Then as you continue in from the right, now you come into the holy place. Notice here, as it continues, look at verse 2. He says, "For there was a tabernacle prepared, the outer one, in which were the lampstand and the table and the sacred bread, which is called the holy place." He brings up these three different aspects that are here. If you look on the north side, the top, you'll find the table of showbread. Every Sabbath day, the priest would have to prepare 12 loaves of bread. And they would put them there every week. This is the physical food that's promised. It's the same thing that Jesus talked about. He said, you seek first my kingdom or His kingdom and His righteousness. He says, I'll take care of all these things. I'll add all these things to you. And sure enough, what's added, I'm going to take care of you physically. You don't have to be concerned about that. It's as if God is making an open-ended invitation. You can come and dine with me anytime. I will always provide. There will always be food on my table. You probably know people in your life who food is going to always be provided. If you go over to their house, they're going to offer you something to eat. God says, here's Jesus. Better minister, better promises, better covenant. He says, come with me. I'll provide. It's always ready. The food never gets stale, always prepared. Then if you look down at the south side of that room of the holy place, you see the menorah. And if you start to think in terms of Jesus, you go, why have a menorah, a seven-ended candlestick, here in the holy place? Well, number one, it's dark. You need light. It just so happens, how does Jesus describe Himself? I'm the light of the world. And sure enough, you see this relationship to guide you through the darkness. Here's Jesus. He says, I'm the menorah. I'm the light. And I'll show you the direction to my Father. Maybe you think about John chapter 14, verse 6, where Jesus says, no one comes to the Father but by me. He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. He says, I'm the way, and I'm the one who's going to light your way home. We need to share this relationship. If you look within the holy place, there's also an altar of incense. In the Old Testament, if you start looking through, David makes a statement, others make statements. Incense has a direct tie in terms of prayer. Even in the New Testament, you see those things come out. You can read through the book of Revelation and get to chapter 5, and it talks about how here are these elders with these golden bowls full of incense. And it specifically says, and these are the prayers of the saints. If you ever wondered where your prayers go, they go into the very aroma before God. And you think about when they're offered in righteousness, there's a sweet aroma. Do you enjoy sweet aromas? Here it is together. We might think about, here's freshly baked bread. That would seem like a sweet aroma. But here the picture is this incense. And to go with this relationship with Jesus in this new covenant, we have a mediator before God. We pray, and here's Jesus that takes our prayers right to the very presence of God. Has God provided for us? Has He taken care of us? Eternal redemption, physical food, a way to light the path to home, to think of to be washed clean by His blood, to think in terms of, to make sure that we're fully dedicated to Him in the way we live and the way we act. Next, you kind of notice in working our way through, the very next thing you come to is this veil that's between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. I hope you remember in thinking back to the death of Jesus, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, He cries out, "It's finished. Into your hands I commit my spirit." And when He does, He breathes His last, and the veil in the temple that was in Jerusalem tears from top to bottom in the midst of an earthquake and rocks that are split. You can read about it in Matthew chapter 27, verse 51. All of a sudden, because of the death of Jesus, there's no longer a separation between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. Priests could come in and worship God. Typically, before this moment in time, only the high priest could enter into the Holy of Holies. But now a way is made for priests to be able to come into His presence. Peter talks about us who are in Jesus faithfully. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, he says, you're a royal priesthood. Well, royalty always points to a king. And it just so happens the king is King Jesus. When you think about going after His kingdom and His righteousness, realize we're here to serve the king. And in Jesus' death, that veil is torn from top to bottom. And in doing that, we as getting to become priests, being made cleansed by His blood, now have the ability to enter in before the very presence of God. You come into this room, the Holy of Holies, but there's really no separation anymore. And you come to the top of the Ark of the Covenant. And on the top of that ark, I want you to kind of notice how this continues. Hebrews chapter 9, look at verses 3 and 4. He says, behind the second veil there was a tabernacle which is called the Holy of Holies, having a golden altar of incense, and the Ark of the Covenant covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding the manna, and Aaron's rod which budded, and the tables of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. But of these things we cannot now speak in detail. That's a lot of detail, by the way. But he says there's more we could tell you, but that'll be enough. When you realize in coming to the Ark of the Covenant, on top of the Ark of the Covenant was the mercy seat. There were 2 cherubim. They were of good size, each of them looking down upon the top of the Ark of the Covenant. Before you could come to the covenant, the 10 commandments that were contained in the Ark of the Covenant, you would have to come through mercy. You would not come through your own works and your own deserving. The only reason you're standing in the holy place in the Holy of Holies is because your heart was sprinkled by blood that you found out in the basin out front. You're not here because of you. We're here because of Him, the high priest, who now serves to minister on behalf of His saints. We're here by mercy. And if you take the mercy seat off of the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant is really not humongous in size. It's only about 2 feet deep, only about 4 feet wide, and it would be carried on poles. And with doing that, you also find within this ark, just as what's given here in verse 4, he says, the golden altar of incense, he says, in the Ark of the Covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding the manna. If you remember out in the wilderness for 40 years, every morning the manna came with the frost, except for on the Sabbath day. And to provide on the Sabbath day, you were to gather twice as much on Friday. And it would last. No other day of the week would it last overnight, except for on Friday. And then it would last Friday night, Saturday, and it would still be good until Sunday morning, the first day of the week. I want you to consider this one. We've already talked about the physical bread out at the table of the presence, the showbread. Now we're dealing with the true manna that comes down out of heaven. I hope you think back to the conversation that Jesus had in John chapter 6. He says, I'm the true manna that comes down from above. He says, I'm here to provide for you spiritually. I can carry you through the harshness of the wilderness, but you're going to have to take me in. You're going to have to, it says, eat, and talking about manna in that context, he says, you have to eat, breathe, and drink me. He says, that's the relationship we need with Jesus. So you see the spiritual side to be fed from with our soul. The next thing that he brings up, he says, and Aaron's rod which budded. We looked a little bit at that last night in terms of, in Korah's rebellion, they wanted to be the leaders, and God said, no way. I've chosen Moses and Aaron as my leaders, Aaron being the high priest. And in seeing that move forward, even after Korah and all those others die, when the earth opens up and swallows them, then it comes that the people start to grumble against God and against Moses. Terrible choice. God tells Moses and Aaron, among the 12 tribes, have the leader from each tribe bring a rod and throw it, place it in the holy place. He says, Aaron, you take a rod as well. The next morning they wake up, and only one rod is budded, and they each wrote their name of the tribe on their rod. And it was the tribe of Levi. It was Aaron's rod. It had budded out almond blossoms. God's chosen leader. Who did God choose to be the high priest in heaven? It's not Aaron. It's not Phinehas. It's not later on another man by the name of Joshua. It's Jesus. And we had better recognize Jesus as the one who gives us the opportunity to stand in life before God. Then if you notice it here at the end of verse 4, he says, and the tables of the covenant. That's the 10 Commandments. Aren't you glad we're not under the 10 Commandments anymore? Now we have a new covenant. And here's Jesus, who is that new covenant. He's the one we're to imitate. He's the one we're to learn from. He's the one we're to go after with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind. He says, this is the relationship that we share together with. And you realize, has God provided for us in every way? Not only the physical, but also the spiritual. Not only in the temporary, but even in the eternal. If you continue on down through these verses, look down at verse 6. He says, now when these things have been so prepared, the priests are continually entering the outer tabernacle, performing the divine worship. He goes back to the earthly side. He says, you see the priests, they go in and out all the time. They never stop because sin's never dealt with. Sin doesn't truly get dealt with until you come to Jesus. And then you find everything you will ever need for all of eternity. Notice the very next verse. Verse 7. But into the second, only the high priest enters once a year, not without taking blood, which he offers for himself and for the sins of the people committed in ignorance. He says, this is what happened back there on the Day of Atonement. High priest would enter in. He had to go through a lot of things before he could enter in. Several sacrifices, several animals, a lot of blood. Even had to offer incense in the Holy of Holies to kind of cloud the room. He says, so that you won't die. But now you come to the new covenant. Now you come to the true tabernacle, the heavenly tabernacle that the Lord pitched before the days of Moses. And he says, now Jesus comes in to the Holy of Holies. And now he comes in with his blood. He says, and the offering that he makes is for the sins that are committed in ignorance. if you have ever wondered, have I ever done something wrong that I don't even know about? That I don't even have the ability to confess because I'm not sure what I've done? Do you know that those sins have already been forgiven? They're already taken care of. Not only is Jesus providing for us in every way, he says, even the things you don't know that you've done wrong, I've forgiven them. How's that for complete forgiveness? Heart sprinkled clean by the blood of Jesus, able by his offering to have eternal redemption, eternal life, and to stand before God. Complete, whole, provided for in every physical way and every spiritual way. Here's the beauty. It said earlier that this covenant is enacted on better promises. How much better do these promises sound than compared to the old? This is what we get to share in. This is why we seek to imitate Jesus with the motives of our heart, with the words of our lips, with our thinking of our minds, with what we do with our hands, where we go with our feet. Because we have life in Jesus. A life that is unparalleled with anything else. And so when you stop and look at God giving just a copy and a shadow, so that we could come to understand the true things, look at what God has provided. Look at his love poured out. And look at the desire he had. The temple in Jerusalem was built in a very specific place. The temple was patterned after the original tabernacle. The reason it was chosen, because a long time ago when God made a promise to Abraham, you're going to have descendants through Isaac. God commanded Abraham, go offer up your son. Abraham responds just as quickly as he can. They leave the next day, the next morning. In Genesis 22, you can read about it. They get up to the certain place. God said, I'll show you the place. They get there. They leave the servants behind. They would never understand what Abraham is about to do. Isaac is carrying the wood. Abraham carrying the rest. And as they climb up, Isaac's old enough to know, we have everything here but something to offer. And God said, Abraham said, God will provide. And as they got to the top of Mount Moriah, Abraham ties up Isaac. He puts him on the altar. He's about to slay him as he pulls his knife out, arms stretched out, ready to kill his son. God calls out, Abraham, Abraham. He says, here I am. He says, you don't have to kill your son. He says, for now I know that you fear me. They turned around and there was a ram that was caught in the thicket behind them by its horns. Abraham took the ram, offered it up in place of his son Isaac. Abraham gave that name a place. He called it Mount Moriah. It literally means God will provide. The very place they were going to build the temple. When you stop and think about the true tabernacle, there should be one thought that resonates through our minds. Later on, David is told the place to build it is the exact same place where Abraham was going to offer up Isaac. And as you look and consider what God has done, God has provided. Provides for us now, will provide for us throughout eternity, but only by the blood of Jesus. There is nothing more valuable nor more precious than the blood of Jesus. And now here he is, ministering in the very presence of God in the true tabernacle that he pitched and he built with his own hands. Maybe he even just spoke it into existence. I don't know. But you realize we have everything we need and more. That's the God we serve. If there's anyone here tonight who doesn't have that relationship with Jesus, notice that he stands ready, waiting for the time when we're ready to dedicate and completely turn our lives to him, to give our lives as a burnt offering, because he gave his son as a sin offering for us. If there's anyone here tonight, if we can be of any aid, will you come while we stand and sing?
I'm satisfied with just a cottage being low, a little silver and a little gold, but in that city where the ransom will shine, I want a gold one, that silver line. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Don't think me poor or deserted or lonely. I'm not discouraged. I'm heaven bound. I'm just a pilgrim in search of a city. I want a mansion, a robe and a crown. I've got a mansion just over the hilltop in that bright land where we'll never grow old. And someday yonder we will never more wander, but walk the streets that are pure as gold. Please be seated.
Carey, I'm sure I speak for everyone here, and on behalf of the elders, our sincere appreciation for your coming, your being here, and reminding us God's never made a promise he didn't keep. He's never promised us anything he's not keeping right now, both in this life and the life to come, and we're grateful. It is a short week. There will be refreshments tonight. Everyone's encouraged to stay and join together and have fellowship and encourage and visit with one another. Let's pray. Holy Father, eternal God, we're grateful for the meetings we've had, the reminders of the promises you've made to us, and the assurance that you keep them, and the guarantee of that is found in the blood of Jesus. Father, we are indeed grateful for the meetings we've had. Pray your blessings on Carey as he returns home tomorrow. Give him safe travels. And take care of Julie and Brooke and Caleb until they can be together again. Father, we thank you now for the food that's been provided. Pray that it would nourish our bodies and that our time together will be strengthening and encouraging to us. In Jesus' name, amen.